What is the solution to trying to curb their power, and can it actually be accomplished through antitrust action? Your thoughts?
I think, I gave a speech in Tel Aviv about a year and a half or so ago. I think the antitrust laws clearly apply and should continue to apply to the market power, whether or not they can adequately address all the problems of the market power that we're dealing with in these industries with the networks. Do it fast enough is the bigger question. And I think that's what has been healthy about the conversation, both on Capitol Hill, within the FTC and the Justice Department. And I think those discussions amongst academics as well is really important. How are we to deal with the type of issues that these companies are raising? And they have real impact, not only in economics, but in policy and democracy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for example, if the Department of Justice charges that Google has monopolization of search, one would expect that case will take at least 2 to 3 years and then potentially be appealed. I mean, you and I could be sitting here, you'll probably be in private practice by then, talking about this 5 years from now. Technology changes so quickly, Macon, as you well know, and it only accelerates those changes. How can we be confident anything actually done after that amount of time would apply to the problem at hand now?
That's a great point. I mean, that's an important point to remember about the practical effects. And the question is, what is the solution? So clearly, antitrust has a role and needs to be applied. But what is the other solution? Where markets fail, Congress steps in and creates a regulatory framework like the FCC or FERC or others. And perhaps there's a role for that in some of the areas. I mean, we saw recently the actions by Twitter and Facebook last week that creates a lot of commotion. And the question is, are these technology platforms, utilities to convey information between you and me? Or are they publishers with the same editorial standards as CBS, Wall Street Journal, and NBC?
Yeah. And
those are important policy questions for the whole country.
Right. Without a doubt, they are. And it's very much unclear exactly, given especially those actions, as you say, of last week. Macon, during your tenure, and I mentioned, of course, over 3 years now, you've seen some very large deals. AT&T Time Warner, which you opposed, and Disney Fox, which you let happen, and then T-Mobile and Sprint, which after a very long review and a consent decree, you allowed to move forward. I want to ask you about that one in particular. We've been talking a lot about 5G lately, given the new phone coming from Apple. Are you confident that Dish is going to represent a real competitor nationwide eventually in 5G?
So I'm as confident as anybody can be. I think the commitments that Dish made as part of the divestiture package were real commitments. I believe, and I think that the judge in Southern District of New York believed Charlie Ergen and his commitments. But, as far as I'm concerned, it was the approval of that deal really created more competition than what we would have seen, especially for the consumers coming up. As 5G is deployed, would we want two competitors, basically a duopoly that we used to have with AT&T and Verizon? Or do we want three strong competitors and likely a fourth one with 5G deployment? And that was really the justification behind that deal approval. It would have been easy to block that deal to try to say, well, there should be a magic 4 players in here and therefore Sprint shouldn't. But I think what we'll see is that Dish is going to be a player. They made strong commitments with strong penalties to both the FCC and the Justice Department, and we'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah, but you still remain confident that they will eventually have the needed capital and the wherewithal to actually become a real competitor.
They will. And look, a big part of the negotiations came down to what kind of freedom do they have to be able to do that. So there was a number of change of control provisions that I personally had to get involved and negotiate because, as you could imagine, the two competitors did not want to necessarily have a third or fourth competitor involved. This was, negotiations between Deutsche Telekom, that owns T-Mobile or a control of T-Mobile, and Sprint. And we put provisions in there that allows them, We certainly don't make market players succeed or fail in the marketplace, but all we can do is allow the conditions for them to succeed. And so they're able to raise money from banks, hedge funds, private equity firms, to be able to continue to build their network. And I think, as you've seen with the pandemic, the demand for connectivity is only going to go up. And so I would expect that the demand for that network will be high.
Shepard Smith here. Thanks for watching CNBC on YouTube.